Hi, my name is John Light, and I've spent over 20 years working throughout all corners of the recruiting world. Our podcast, Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool, is a resource to help you stay afloat and get ahead of your competition. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. I'm your host, John Light, President and CEO of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today I want to introduce, I guess, frankly, who when we first connected and started talking, it was like a continual train of topics we wanted to cover that we have a lot of overlap in and have some seriously in-depth thoughts. So welcome, Steve Diorio, to Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. As we get started into this, one of the things that caught my attention when we started talking is that I don't know if polymath is the right word, but I mean, you're very diverse in terms of the things that you do. You're a senior fellow for Wharton AI or at Wharton AI, managing director in revenue enablement. You've done some really amazing stuff, and revenue enablement I know is a topic we want to talk about because it's like this incredibly new and diverse job category in a sense, and it does some things that I think traditionally have been handled by committee and now aren't any longer. And on top of that, you've got an amazing academic and kind of stay, not necessarily academic, but study background where you've done a ton of research as a co-author for Revenue Operations, a book about aligning sales and marketing, monetizing data, and igniting growth. Man, that's a mouthful, Steve. So let me hand it off to you. And what would you want to add to that?
Well, John, that's a fancy way of saying I'm a nerd, if I'm listening correctly. Quite frankly, I think it's true. I think it's true. So yes, I'm an engineer. I want the world to work like a factory. Everything's got to be designed properly. But over the last 30 years, as technology has been introduced into the sales and marketing process, the whole notion of process, analytics, discipline, and operations have really come into the fore. So if you think back to the 80s and you imagine kind of a John McEnroe fro with a
headband,
with a headband, and you look at the commercial model back then, it was a ton of advertising and a ton of salespeople in cars on planes. IBM used to call it a 8-wheeled sales call, 8 engineers and 2 cars. Cost about $1,000 with some advertising promotion. Very little data, no digital channels, no technology really. Fast forward now to 2024. If you look at the pie of where money goes, growing a business has become a capital-intensive, data-driven, digital team sport.
Right.
And what do I mean by that? 83% of the buying cycle in B2B is digital. It happens in digital channels. Everything is driven by data. Data about customers is, in fact, the largest financial asset in the business. And it's capital-intensive because 38% of growth investment is actually CapEx. So if you think about it, you build a factory, you got the robots, the machines, the stamping equipment, the factory, that's CapEx. And then you got OpEx, the people, then the lubricant and the materials that go in and the cost of goods sold and some expense. Well, it used to be, marketing and growing was all OpEx. Salespeople, planes, advertising, promotion, and discounts. Now, I've got digital channels. I've got databases. I've got software. The average frontline seller has $15,000 of technology wrapped around them, like a transformer.
No kidding.
By the way, that's low. A long-haul truck driver has more. A McDonald's worker has more technology. A warehouse worker at Amazon has more technology helping them do their job than the average frontline seller. So even though it's $15,000, and no one adds that number up. So again, growing a business has become a data-driven, digital team sport.
When I look around today, I see so much emphasis on the front end put into product market fit. And you go back and you look at marketing and you look at companies in the 80s, and we had wonderful flailing misstarts like New Coke. And the lessons learned from that and carry it forward. But now you don't have to be a Coca-Cola sized enterprise to not only start a business, but to scale a business. What you have to be able to do is crack the code relative to A, how people buy your product, and B, that you have a product market fit that people want to spend their money on. Because you and I know, and I encounter this in the recruiting side of the business. I mean, the reputation of a firm, especially within the industry, means a lot. You know, you look at somebody like Robert Half, they're F&A and tech-centric, or IT-centric, I should say. Their reputation is hard. They're a challenging place to work for a lot of people, but that they've also trained their competition. They teach great fundamentals. You look at other places, and they'll talk about how they burn people out, and they just roll through them. And some other places are just excellent on delivery, and they have that reputation that carries forward. And I wonder, you know, if you don't have great product market fit when you go to market nowadays, because there's so many digital channels that also allow digital feedback and digital word of mouth, if I can put it that way, it can discombobulate your marketing and your sales in a heartbeat if that's not right. So that has to be right. But to your point, the expense of the people going around and pitching your product or your service, that mix has changed immensely. I think the speed that everything moves now because of data and its accessibility has become mind-boggling compared to what we saw in the 80s.
You've created a mouthful, and let me unpack that. So one, we've done a lot of analysis, and executives need to understand how a business grows, and specifically the math and the assets and the levers that drive growth. And a lot of people don't understand these things. And the reality is, what I'm saying is, a lot, 6 of the 16 variables that drive growth are assets. You mentioned a few of them: brand equity, customer equity, the quality of the products and the people are all proven in academic research to cause future growth and cash flow. So IBM as a brand, Cisco as a brand, they're going to win the deal unless somebody gives them a reason not to because of risk. Amazon has a digital customer experience. That's an asset. It's built with technology. A lot of people have quality people. So those are the things. But then teamwork, interdisciplinary, how well you support an account. You know, do the marketing people hand off to sales? Is customer service and onboarding working? Is it all coherent? Is there no abrasion? So those are all things. So we've identified 16 value levers that drive growth. And I think it's like a periodic table. You need oxygen, and I think you need all these things. The people aspect is important. I talked about the 4-wheel sales call with 4 engineers. Right. Now people use the term, what you were alluding to, people are using the term called a 4D seller: digital, data-driven, distributed, and diverse. And so if you thought about where that person spent their time 20 years ago, a lot of it was traveling, a lot of it was pitching, a lot of it was on the phone. Right. Now that person is doing far more engagement using sales engagement schools, digital technologies, email, text, social. So the actual volume and speed, you said an important word, speed of engagement is up there. So, there's a territorial quota planning model that says, here's your job, here's how you treat customers, here's how you allocate your time. These are the actions that you do every day. And that used to be fill up the bag, go out, knock on doors, shoe leather express.
Deliver your donuts.
Now that's a cadence. What's your cadences? How many cadences? How many people did you touch? How many, follow-ups did you? God forbid you actually get people on the phone. The bar is really high. So that for that 13%, for that 13% of time that your lips are moving, the bar is really high. You got to deliver value. You got to differentiate, because that person, that customer, can get 90% of what they need online. So when they're talking to you, they're looking for those intangibles and that value add that only a human can give. So I think if you look at the time profile, productivity profile, resource allocation, cadence, of what a 4D seller does versus a shoe leather seller from 30 years ago, it's a profound change. And they could never keep up the speed that you're talking about and the volume of engagement if they weren't armed with digital tools or data that help them make decisions, answer questions faster, follow up faster. So I think you've made a really, really important point there as it relates to those people. And we also like to use this Spock and Kirk metaphor, just to go back to the 70s now or the 60s. It used to be Kirk, EQ, just personality, relationships, trust, and leadership. But now, to use some of these tools to find the information, to use analytics to do your job better, you need a little bit more Spock in there. So the profile of person you're hiring, we always say, do you want to dumb down the tech so Kirk can do it? Or do you want to, weave a little Spock into the profile so that you got someone who's, smart enough to use these tools? And that's another dynamic that I think you probably see, John, in the talent end of the market.
Well, I think we're dancing around something that's happening in real time today and has been ongoing. And that is the evolution of what comprises each job category, each job title that we're used to seeing, say, a decade ago, even 5 years ago. I read a study earlier this year that put forward the idea that just a straight up financial analyst job description has evolved something like 20+% over the past 5 years. That if you compared the one today to the one 5 years ago, there's 20%, 2 out of 10 things on that description are different nowadays. And I think there is a dynamic occurring in the market. And it's one of the reasons why I was really excited to have you on here, am really excited to have you on here, is that this jobs are becoming, I think by necessity, especially as you climb the food chain, climb the ladder, roles and functions are becoming more holistic and less specifically siloed. Because there are efficiencies to be gained if a person can manage information mentally in such a way as to be the final facilitator or decision maker on what next steps in a sales process might be, in approaching the digital market in a certain way, on product market fit, on hiring, on a host of other issues. Yeah, there can be inputs from a lot of people, but I think there's an opportunity that's bubbling up here that's evolving. And I think we're years away from it as far as AI goes, because it seems to speed things up. But the process to sell today is a different process than it was in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And so the question I always have is, A, what's this doing to job descriptions from both the employer side and the employee or job candidate side? But also, how fast is this going to go from where we are today to the point where we're all riding our AI rockets around the marketplace and making decisions and are required to have a broader view of business, to be dialed into the company goals or organizational goals and execute on it with some level of autonomy that is just hard to find nowadays?
I can respond to that twofold. My area of expertise is bringing in the next generation of growth leaders. Some people call them CROs if it's the top executive running growth. Other people call it revenue operations, which is the person who owns the revenue teams, but also the operations systems, data, and processes that support the entire revenue cycle. So in a pure form, a revenue operations superstar would have marketing at the front of the funnel, sales for acquisition, customer success for onboarding, and the account management for expanding the account. And they'd have all the systems of record along the way. They have all the data about those customers, and then have one long process that looked and smelled like the entire customer journey, from discovery and education to transaction to consumption to more. That's a huge organization. I'll give you a data point. One big networking services company had 40 different functional jobs just in the operations that supported everything I just described. And they rationalized that down to 15, and they thought that was a home run. at the end of the day, I think these organizations are a moving target. People will start to connect the knee bone to the thigh bone to eliminate points of failure, to eliminate leakage, to improve the customer experience, or just to gain economies. For example, you've established that I'm a nerd, John. And in my world,
You're welcome.
We have a joke. What's the difference between marketing operations and sales operations?
I think
the answer is
that's a salient question. I mean, I've always viewed marketing. I'm just talking off the cuff here. I've always viewed marketing as the people who brought your targets to sell to, and sales is the people who actually went in and did the tactical execution, closing the sale, getting things signed, and then ensuring that it got handed off properly to delivery.
That's happening instantaneously. It's the same system. It's the same to the customer. They don't tell the difference. It could be happening automatically. Same systems, same data. It's a seamless process. So at the end of the day, why isn't it one job? And the short answer is sales operations and marketing operation. The difference is about 6 months. In 6 months, it will be the same job because, it's all the same type of thing. It's all the same systems, the same data, the same processes, the same plays, the same content, and the same motion. So I think that's just a joke, but I think it makes the point. And then why, I'll tell you another story. In a SaaS business, and I think a lot of the innovation you're talking about here is coming from SaaS businesses where it's a recurring revenue stream and 90% of the conversation is happening with the customer success people. I have never met customer service or success people who couldn't tell me with 90% certainty if a customer was going to leave, if a customer was happy, if a customer was going to buy more. 6 months before it happened. Now, why is that information sitting here deep in the expansion phase of the funnel when salespeople, marketing people, and other people need to understand that? And so that's another example of why does customer success and the systems that support them exist in isolation of marketing and sales and the systems that support them? Because the intelligence they have is critical to who do I need to advertise to? The people who are going to leave? Or who do I need to call? The people who want to buy more? Who do I need to give attention to? The people who are pissed off. And so for me, that's an example of all of these things come together. And so I think when you think about a job description, I think people are going to be skating to where the puck is going. You got to post a job. You got to hire somebody. You got to pay them. You got to train them. No doubt about that. What you want to do, though, is hire people who can grow with the job or have the skills to pull the job together or have the skills to work with those other players to make that job something bigger than it is. So I think this sense of trajectory, it's changing. You got to put a job rec out. You got to hire somebody. And I love the term you used, which is, I think you used the word permanent hire and a retention firm, because if you're going to have somebody, you're going to want someone to go all the way. And the thing they say about revenue operations, they call it a farm system for the next generation of growth leaders. If you've got, if you're my age, you probably were on a plane flying around doing PowerPoint pitches, and that's how you got where you are. You're not digitally savvy. You can mouth the words. Your daughter's on TikTok. But at the end of the day, you really don't get it. You're not good with data. You probably can't even do math. And so the people coming up, the job is different. You're there, you're experienced, the business, but you're not, if you had to write a rec, the rec, these people, I've seen people go from a cold calling desk, become a CRM administrator, study analytics, study finance, learn a little bit about marketing. These guys are dangerous. They understand where the data is. They know what it says. They know what it means financially. They know what it means to marketing. They know what it means to sales. These people get in the boardroom really, really quickly, whether it's in their job because they're explaining what's going on. So I'm like, that to me is that next generation of athlete coming through the farm system that's going to rock the world. So I think all of them kind of, I'm barbelling it. Obviously, old people like me are in the C-suite for good or bad reasons, but I think you can't use that as a template for for what's going to come next.
Well, and I think, a couple of things. Number one, and you and I talked about this before, I think people make a strategic error. We call it a tactical error, I guess, when they look at create a job description and recruit to that job description. I'm not a big fan of that. In fact, in my firm, we don't use ads whatsoever. We're completely digital and human-to-human outreach. And the reason we do that is the first thing we do with the description is rather than going to check boxes, we create what the ideal candidate should look like. What does good look like? Now, that doesn't include physical appearance. It really talks about their characteristics, their qualities, their experience, their value impact that they've demonstrated historically in the roles they've been in. And then figure out, okay, who can we find when we look at, we can say, this is what good looks like. And those are the candidates we pursue. And the great thing about it is we're not limited to this artificial, arbitrary construct of, I have to check these 20 boxes. No, I have to find somebody who mirrors what good looks like so that when they come in there, they can do what good does and deliver that value. And part of that value that I'm hearing from you is this holistic view of how everything fits together. But circling back on that, I'm curious your thoughts on the idea. Is this a technological capital issue or a human capital issue? That is to say, in your example, okay, we have customer success sitting way down here at the end of the pipe, far away from marketing and sales and production and development and all this other stuff. And it's kind of, they have data we need. We have data that we should be using. Is that a gap in technology, or is that a human capital gap, i.e., we don't have the people thinking about how to break the process and rebuild it into something better, or we don't have the technology capable of supporting that process? I mean, where is the disconnect? Because, and it could be both, frankly, Steve.
I know. I said that's a really good question, and it is a hard question. But let me try to answer this. I think it's both, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
One, growing a business is asset intensive. I've got an e-commerce site, infrastructure, database. I've got to get a return. I got a brand. I got customer equity. Mm-hmm. That gives me permission to sell more stuff to those people. I need to get a return on assets. So if I'm thinking about any capital intensive business, plane, a building, I got to keep turning that, putting people through it, getting utilization on that. And the people who run hotels are really, really good. The talent in a hotel is really, really good at getting a return on asset. Yeah, they care about, managing costs and the customer experience, but they got to keep that hotel filled and moving and getting a return. And everything they do is about that. So if you think about a business, the people who are running that business can't just be sweat on their brow, individual performance. Mm-hmm. They've got to get more out of that machine. So I think about a Formula One race team. The driver's driving the stick shift. He's driving the curves, shifting the gears, managing the torque to make sure that they're getting every ounce out of that $1 million race car. And he's got a support team around him and a big support team who's tuning it, changing the tires, adapting to the stage of the race, and keeping it in top form. Didn't used to be that. It used to be show up with your shoe leather and your bag, and it was all on you. Mm-hmm. And so I think the race car analogy is a good one, or even the hotel manager is a good one, which is you're a talented person. You have to know about marketing, sales, and all those things, but you've got occupancy rates and turnover are the things that you're looking for. And in the race car, you're trying to get every ounce of torque and speed out of that machine. So I think it's both, but I think it's both in that context. And when you break it down to the overall structure of the team and the guys behind the wheel of the race car, that gets really interesting when you describe their job and the skills they need.
Right. Well, and I think you sit back too, and regardless of what technology is, if you can't align the human capital piece of it, you're going to fail. I mean, you can't execute your strategy without the talent to execute it. And part of that is, I think we tend to limit ourselves based on our past experiences. Well, we have to have this position. We have to have that job requirement. We have to have X, Y, Z. And granted, there are some areas where you do have to have. If you're doing financial reporting, you want a CPA in the chair leading that. If you are building bridges and such like, you're going to want a professional engineer or a bunch doing the project and getting it along. Same thing with architecture, and we can name a whole host of things. But what about the skills of actually how they apply, the paradigm through which they look at a set of data and go, wait a second, I see this differently. My perspective is differently because I see an opportunity for us to exploit versus a roadblock that we can't surmount. And I think that is part of the flexibility and resourcefulness that the market needs from business leaders right now, because we have to evolve and adapt with what's happening around us.
Can I build on a word you used?
Yeah, please.
And I think it's architect and commercial architecture. So I want to make 2 points. The job description cannot live in isolation from the commercial model,
right,
or the math, the way the company grows and the way it's organized. So what do I mean by that? A lot of the firms that are growing faster, SaaS businesses, and they are very oriented towards the back end of the revenue cycle, right? Consumption, utilization, retention, upsell, and cross-sell. That's very different from the typical widget or copier salesman. So one, that informs the type of people I need. Second is the math of growth. What are my economics? What behaviors and consumption from a client goes? How are my channels mixed? How do I grow? Is it the brand, which is I'm counting on people paying twice as much for my product because I'm Google, or am I just coming in as the low price player and then making it up on transaction costs? Those all matter. Or is it customer loyalty? Third is the structure. Some people have these monolithic pod-like teams where everybody is playing positionless basketball. Others have codified roles where customer success is a function that has reporting. So I think when you describe the job, you cannot describe it in isolation of the math of growth, the commercial model, and the way the organization is structured. Now at least the structure can change, but I think that's a fallacy. Everyone asks me, what's the perfect job description for a RevOps person? What's included in their title? How do you compensate them? And I'm like, well, it's all like a fingerprint or a snowflake.
Yeah.
It's really how it fits. The second thing I want to talk about is commercial architecture. And this is really important. A Salesforce is a design problem. You have 7 levers you can pull: products in the bag, territories, incentives, skills, something called treatment models. And how frequently and how do you gauge people? Quality of service. I can turn those dials, territories, in ways that make that Salesforce grow like crazy. I can make that the cheapest, most cost-effective Salesforce in the world. I can make it the most, the customer experience outstanding by just dialing up treatment and whatever. And I can make it very profitable by focusing it. That's all a choice. A lot of times people get a project, how many salespeople do I need to grow? And I'm like, well, how have you designed and architected your commercial model? It's not just the comp. And it's like, well, look, I'm going to load them up with $20,000 in tech, and I'm going to ask them to run 5 times faster because they're Iron Man, if you know what I mean. So I think people are losing this notion, or got to get familiar with the notion of you could architect a Salesforce or a selling team to perform any way you want. You control those dials. And if you've got a Formula One race car, you better get a driver who knows how to run the curves or drive a stick or whatever it is. So I think this notion of architecting the commercial model, and then obviously, finding a person who fits is important. But architecture is really important. And I've seen you can double the performance, profitability, productivity, or growth rate of a selling organization just by turning dials. And I think that's lost on a lot of people.
I think the key word that keeps popping in my head is context. Context matters. You wouldn't take mom and pop $100 million company who needs a software engineer or a VP of IT, for example, and pull their job description out of Apple you'd want to create it for the context of that company. Like you said, the commercial model, their scope, where they want to be, how they want to grow, what makes sense to them. And I think when you talk architecture, the challenge with it is I view architecture as a very strategic thought. It's funny, I worked at a paint and glass store for an architect, incidentally, for a while in college. And when he designed windows that we needed to go install on a new build, when the commercial building starts being built, the reality of getting that window to fit, to be installed properly and whatever else in there, could be very different from what was drawn up on paper. And I think there is a need. I think there is a need in that context to really understand why you're doing what you're doing. And my sense is, I could be wrong about this, Steve. I think education needs to change, not just education in schools, education that comes on the job. Demonstration from executive leadership that the same old doesn't cut it. Rather, we've got to be more innovative in our approach and allow more flexibility. One of the things, I read a really great book, I'm trying to remember the name on it, but it was on how the U.S. military functioned over the past 20 years, how it functioned in World War II, and the empowerment that was often given culturally in our military to NCOs, non-commissioned officers. We're talking your sergeants, your other enlisted men and women, because they were read into what they're trying to accomplish. They weren't just command and control to the point where they could only do what they were told. They had the flexibility to think innovatively, to address the situation, to kind of follow Eisenhower's axiom that planning is essential, but plans are useless. And I wonder sometimes if we do enough of that. And I was just thinking about how, as we talk about revenue enablement, revenue operations, and we talk about this at least synthesized or new job category or set of categories, if I can put it this way, when you look across the playing field of companies, especially in the United States, and you've dealt with some big boys, some really massive companies, when you look at them as a percentage of that pool, how many of them are going this direction or are already there versus, let's just say, your smaller, closely held companies, or maybe 50 million to 500 million in revenue? Because making this evolution isn't just about, do you have a massive organization that can just pour money into it? In fact, I would think that could be an impediment as much as an advantage. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on, as we look at this, hey, how does a little guy keep up with the big guy? Or is it the other way around?
I think it's both. If you look at our quality of revenue operations model, where we look at 100% of the factors that drive growth, brand, customer equity are two of them. That would favor an established guy. You can't build a brand overnight. I just did a profile on Cisco. Cisco's brand is worth $40 billion. And it's, one of the biggest assets in the company, because if there's a tie, Cisco wins.
You go the name brand.
If Cisco's 10% above, they win. If they're launching a new cyber product, it gets tried. And they get the benefit of the doubt. Likewise, if your business is all about cross-sell, it helps to have thousands of customers. But you flip it around to the smaller side. You said, hey, maybe it's the opposite. And it is true. It's a lot easier to be data-driven and digital when you don't have any technology debt, and you can build a modern commercial stack from scratch from pieces that connect to each other. And so I see a lot of these other firms don't have that technology debt, but they also don't have bad habits and legacy. They don't have old guys like me who want to do it the way it worked. And I had an Inc. 500 company in the 90s before there was even the internet. And if I said, let me tell you how we did in the 90s, we wouldn't be in business for very long. Yet there are these entrenched belief systems about how you sell, embedded in old farts like me running businesses, that actually hold them back. So I think, and sometimes processes are sclerotic, fiefdoms exists, CMOs get budgets they don't want to give up. They want to win awards in the south of France doing advertising when that money would be better off going into digital channels. So I think there are pros and cons. The good way to navigate it, and what I advise people, is to look at the math of growth. And we've broken down 16 operating levers and 46 specific drivers that will let you build an equation for how your business grows. If everyone agrees on the math of how the company grows, then form follows function. Mm-hmm. You can pretty quickly figure out the things you need. Like Formula One racing is highly scientific. Even positionless basketball, I need a certain number of rebounds, a certain number of shots to fall, a certain number of turnovers, certain number of things, and I'll win. And so I think when people understand the math, they can get those rebounds. Think about Moneyball. I just need a certain number of hits and RBIs. I don't have to have one superstar. I can have 40 people who do it. I'll just do it any way I can. I think that's the way people have to think. And again, how those skills configure in a small business that may not have the brand or the customer base, or a bigger business that may be slower and more sclerotic and entrenched in its ways, are really interesting problems. I like to break it down to the atomic level, which is why I like this notion of a periodic table of growth. Let's go there and let's figure out the chemistry or the math of how it works.
It really sounds to me like if you figure out the architecture, you figure out your tech stack, it really comes down to a human capital issue. Talent acquisition, talent management, talent retention. You want the historicity, but getting the right people at the right time, doing the right stuff. And
I tell you, you got the best car in the world if you don't have a world-class driver, if you don't have a great point guard, distributor, quarterback on a football team. I think those are horrible, simply analogies, but I think they make your point. You can spend all the money in the world and have the best franchise, but talent matters.
If you're a hiring manager, I'm going to approach this from two sides again. If you're a hiring manager, you've got your 16 levers sitting out there. I'm curious, from a hiring perspective, how would you go about prioritizing what you're searching for, right? Because it's not going to be what you traditionally have hired for in the past. If you're going to go the revenue operations, revenue enablement route. But on the flip side of that, the other side of the coin, if you're a candidate and you've been in marketing, or you've been in sales, or you've been in development, or you've been in customer success, wherever you've been in the chain of delivery, if I could put it that way, the chain of the company that generates the revenue, what can you do? What do you think they should do or be aware of or look at, investigate, however you want to say it, to prepare themselves for this movement in the market?
That's a good question. You mentioned that I'm a senior fellow at Wharton, and we're actually building a revenue operations MBA program. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, the people I work with at Wharton have trained literally the captains of industry. They've given them an MBA. And what they say is we have failed, and that making people think that growth is a discipline when it's interdisciplinary. And I think one of the things I'd say from a talent standpoint is you've got to master a lot of different disciplines. When we look at the MBA curriculum, it biases very heavily towards marketing and product management. You know about marketing, you know about product launches, you know about all those things. Only 4 MBA programs in the country offer a course on business development. Shocking. Second, a lot of the people in sales or tech don't have the basic finance skills. So that's a gap. And then advanced analytics and data management. So if we had to advise somebody, whether they're in a job and evolving or whether they're doing an MBA, I think, one, you have to have sat in the selling seat and know what it's like on a day-to-day basis, whether that's in a job or whatever. Second, get the marketing stuff. You get that. And the product management, the 4 Ps of pricing, you'll generally get those things. You have to understand finance. It used to be at Procter & Gamble, you had a whole department in marketing finance where people were adding up and really, zeroing in on all those costs. They fired all those people. And now people don't even think about finance and growth as even the same thing. And then I think advanced analytics, you've got to understand the math. You can't just trust the black box. You got to understand how the algorithm works. You got to program the algorithms. You got to trust the algorithm. And you've got to feed data into that algorithm. So I think that is, and then you've really got to be comfortable with data. I don't think you have to be great with all of it, but you have to be confident in the data. You have to know where it came from. You have to know what it tells you, what it doesn't. You've got to be able to separate the signal from the noise. So I think you're going to get the product management and the marketing management down. I think you've got to zero in on the math, the accounting and finance. Got to get some sales experience along the way. Too many of these managers never sat in the chair.
Right.
And then you got to go deep as you can on the analytics. That's the big differentiator. If you can understand data and explain what it means from a financial standpoint to a sales and marketing person, you're the triple threat. And I think none of those things come in any traditional major. So this is kind of a mashup. And whether you're learning it on the job, taking it in night classes, or God forbid your company actually builds those skills, I think that's the levers you got to pull. And that's sort of the challenge we have, as we put together this RevOps MBA program.
Sounds like a heavy lift. I mean, because at the end of the day, too, the buyers, the end users of those MBAs, not just people that are earning that degree, but people who are going to hire them, have to be bought into that, hey, this is going to deliver value. And man, it sounds like a great challenge.
Well, yeah, we teach a class called Advanced Analytics for Managers. And we got some pretty senior executives in there at Wharton. And I got to tell you something. You don't have, they walk out understanding the power of data, and they know they have to know enough to ask the right questions about what the data is telling them, what the data should do, and what to ask the data. And so I think it's amazing to watch these open-minded, managers, they're good managers, start to see the power of what the data could do for their business. And they're like, look, I can't do Boolean algebra and I'm not a data scientist, but boy, I'm going to go back to work and I'm going to ask my analytics teams some really hard questions. And I'm going to challenge them to create value for the business, because they've got a new set of eyeglasses and they see how the data can be monetized in pricing algorithms, in resource optimization, in channel optimization, and personalization.
Yeah, the paradigm's changed. Well, Stephen, I got to say thank you, man, because you and I figured we'd have an interesting conversation, and I think this is exactly as we thought it would be. We covered a whole lot of territory, and I'm sure anyone listening to it is going to be given a lot to think about, and they can certainly find you on LinkedIn. I know you and I are connected. They can find your book, Revenue Operations, on Amazon. I know because I went and checked. Made sure it was there and accessible. And beyond that, I think anybody out there, whether you're at a very small company or medium or large enterprise, doesn't really matter, would benefit tremendously to wrap your head around these 16 levers that drive revenue. Because it's not just one thing. And business leaders, not just executives at Fortune 500, but business leaders at all sizes and contexts, need to know those 16 levers. They need to know what to push when, how to dial it in and out. Because at the end of the day, we're not far off with the accessibility of data, I think, a matter of a handful of years or so, to get to the point where you're going to have to know your business and how it operates, it functions front to back. Everybody, whether you're an executive at a Fortune 1000 or 500 or at a small company, you're going to have an entrepreneurial streak of piloting that aircraft that is supported by mechanics and aviation specialists and people providing fuel and whole supply chains of data leading up to those decisions. And so I thank you a lot, Steve, for this. And I hope we have some more conversations around it, because I think it would be fun. And maybe we could even squeeze a dad joke or two in there, and not talk so much about the bald guys, because that's a little personal, just a little bit personal.
We're just blessed. So
Steve, thanks so much.
thank you.
You've been listening to Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. This podcast is sponsored by Sabretooth. Sabretooth improves the quality of hire and speeds up the time to fill specialized machine learning, data engineering, data science, and developer roles, stretching tech recruiting budgets further by bringing the precision of retained search and the speed of contingent search to the market in one complete solution. Find out more at sbr2th.com and follow me, John Light, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.